Have you ever noticed this? You walk into a room. You listen more than you speak. You choose your words carefully. And suddenly, people start making assumptions about you. They think you are shy, or insecure, or uninterested. Or worse, they think you have nothing to say. But the truth is, you are simply quiet. And in America, being quiet is often misunderstood. Hello, my friend. Thank you for being here today. If English is not your first language, and you live, work, or study in the United States, this message may feel very familiar. You may have noticed that in meetings, the loudest voice often gets the most attention. In classrooms, the fastest speaker is seen as the smartest. At work, silence is sometimes mistaken for weakness. And over time, you may start asking yourself painful questions. Is something wrong with me? Should I talk more even when I don't feel ready? Do people think I'm less capable just because I'm quiet? If you have ever felt this way, you are not alone. Many non-native English speakers experience this silently. They think deeply. They observe carefully. But they hesitate to speak. Not because they lack ideas, but because they want to be understood. And that hesitation is often misunderstood. In today's video, we are going to talk about something rarely explained clearly. Why being quiet can be misunderstood, especially in American culture. This is not about teaching you to become loud. It is not about forcing confidence that feels fake. And it is not about changing who you are. This is about understanding the invisible rules around communication. It is about protecting your self-worth. And it is about learning how silence is interpreted, even when it does not reflect who you truly are. If you are someone who listens first, thinks deeply, and speaks with intention, this video is for you. So take a deep breath. Slow down with me. And let's begin by understanding what silence really means and why it is so often misunderstood. Part 1. Silence means different things in different cultures. To understand why being quiet is often misunderstood, we need to start with something very important. Silence does not mean the same thing in every culture. In many parts of the world, silence is a sign of respect. It means you are listening carefully. It means you are giving space to others. It means you are thinking before you speak. In some cultures, speaking too much can be seen as rude. Interrupting is unacceptable. And saying less, but saying it well, is valued. But American culture works differently. In the United States, communication is often fast, direct, and visible. People are encouraged to speak up early, to share ideas quickly, to show confidence through words. Silence, in this context, is often uncomfortable. When someone is quiet, people may start guessing what that silence means. They might think, he doesn't understand. She lacks confidence. He has no opinion. She's not engaged. And most of the time, those assumptions are wrong. But here is the problem. In American culture, people rarely ask what silence means. They interpret it. And interpretation is shaped by culture, not by truth. For a non-native English speaker, this creates a silent conflict. Inside your mind, you may be processing information carefully. You may be translating thoughts, choosing the right words, checking grammar, making sure your message is clear. But on the outside, all people see is silence. They don't see the thinking. They don't see the effort. They only see the pause. And in a culture that values speed, a pause can be mistaken for inability. This is not because Americans are unkind. It is because they are used to a different communication style. From a young age, children in the U.S. are encouraged to raise their hands, to speak even when unsure, to participate verbally. Talking is often connected to confidence. Confidence is connected to competence. So when someone does not talk much, the system struggles to place them. This is where misunderstanding begins. Your silence is not empty, but others may see it that way. And when silence is misunderstood, it can slowly affect how people treat you. They may stop asking for your opinion. They may overlook your abilities. They may underestimate your value, not because you lack skill, but because your way of communicating does not match their expectations. Understanding this difference is not about blaming yourself, and it is not about blaming the culture. It is about awareness. When you realize that silence means different things. To different people, you stop taking misunderstandings personally. You begin to see that. The problem is not your quiet nature. The problem is the gap between cultures. And once you understand that gap, you can learn how to navigate it without losing who you are. Part 2. When quiet is mistaken for lack of confidence. In American society, confidence is often loud. It shows itself through quick answers, through strong opinions, through people who speak without hesitation. Because of this, many Americans grow up believing one idea. If you are confident, you speak up. If you don't speak, you must not be confident. But this idea is incomplete. Confidence does not always need noise, and silence does not always mean fear. For many non-native English speakers, being quiet is not about insecurity. It is about control. You want to choose the right words. You want to avoid misunderstanding. You want to be accurate, not fast. But in a fast-moving conversation, this careful approach can be misread. People may think you are unsure of yourself. They may think you doubt your own ideas. They may think you are waiting for permission. In reality, you are waiting for clarity. This misunderstanding becomes especially clear in the workplace. Imagine a meeting. Ideas are flying quickly. People interrupt each other. Some speak before fully thinking. You, on the other hand, listen to everything. You analyze the situation. You see connections others miss. You have something valuable to say. But by the time you are ready, the conversation has already moved on. Later, someone else says an idea, very similar to the one you had, and they receive the credit. Not because they are smarter, not because they are more capable, but because they spoke first. Over time, this pattern sends a dangerous message to your mind. You start thinking, maybe I really am less confident. Maybe I'm not leadership material. Maybe my personality is a disadvantage. This is where the damage happens. When society misreads your silence, and you begin to believe that misunderstanding, your confidence can slowly shrink. But let's be clear about something. Many confident people are quiet. They do not need to prove themselves constantly. They do not need to fill every silence. They trust their thoughts enough to wait. The problem is not your confidence. The problem is how confidence is measured. In American culture, confidence is often measured by visibility. Who speaks the most? Who speaks the fastest? Who dominates the room? But true confidence is internal. It is knowing your value, even when you are not the loudest voice. For non-native speakers, this difference is especially painful. You may already be working twice as hard, just to communicate. When your silence is misunderstood as weakness, it can feel deeply unfair. But understanding this pattern gives you back your power. When you realize that people may confuse quiet with insecurity, you stop questioning your worth. You begin to separate how others see you from who you truly are. And that awareness is the first step toward protecting your confidence in a world that does not always recognize it. Part 3. Thinking in another language looks like silence. One thing most people never see is what happens inside your mind when English is not your first language. From the outside, it may look like silence, but inside, there is a lot of movement. You are listening. You are translating. You are organizing thoughts. You are choosing words carefully. This process takes time, and time in American conversations is often limited. Native speakers think and speak in the same language. Their thoughts flow directly into words. For you, there is an extra step, sometimes 2 or 3. You may first understand the idea, then convert it into English, then check if it sounds natural, then decide if this is the right moment to speak. All of this can happen in a few seconds. But in fast conversations, a few seconds feels like a long pause. And that pause is often misunderstood. People may assume you are confused, or unprepared, or unsure. They don't realize you are doing mental work they don't need to do. This is especially common in group settings, meetings, class discussions, casual conversations at work. While others are speaking freely, you may still be forming the first sentence. And by the time you are ready, someone else has already taken the floor. Again and again, your silence is not a lack of ideas. It is a sign of processing in another language. But here's the painful part. Most people do not understand this difference. They judge what they see, not what they cannot see. They see a quiet person. They don't see the effort. They don't see the intelligence. They don't see the courage it takes to speak in a second language. Over time, this misunderstanding can make you quieter. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you feel rushed. You feel pressured to speak fast, even when your mind is not ready. And when you speak too fast, mistakes happen. Then you may feel embarrassed. You may regret speaking at all. So you return to silence. This creates a cycle. You speak less. People expect less from you. You are given fewer chances to speak, and your silence becomes permanent. Not by choice, but by misunderstanding. But thinking in another language is not a weakness. It is a skill. It means your brain is flexible. It means you can navigate different systems. It means you understand complexity. Silence, in this case, is simply the space where thinking happens. The problem is not your pace. The problem is that modern conversations rarely make space for it. When you understand this, you stop blaming yourself for being too slow or too quiet. You begin to see your silence as a sign of depth, not absence. And that understanding changes how you carry yourself, even before you speak. Part 4. The dangerous assumptions people make about quiet people. When people do not understand silence, they begin to fill it with assumptions, and assumptions are rarely kind. In American culture, there is often discomfort with silence. So instead of asking questions, people create stories in their minds. They decide what your silence means. They may assume you are unfriendly, that you are distant, that you don't care. In some cases, they may even think you are arrogant. Yes, arrogant, because when someone does not speak much, Others sometimes believe. They are judging quietly. None of these assumptions are fair, but they happen every day. At work, a quiet person may be seen as lacking leadership. In social settings, they may be seen as boring. In classrooms, they may be seen as disengaged. And over time, these labels begin to stick. The most dangerous part is that these assumptions are made without evidence. No one asks, "Why are you quiet?" No one asks, "What are you thinking?" They simply decide. And once people decide who you are, they treat you accordingly. They may stop inviting you into conversations. They may stop asking for your input. They may stop seeing your potential. This is how silence becomes isolation. Not because you chose it, but because others built walls around you, using their own misunderstandings. For non-native English speakers, this is even more painful. You may already feel like an outsider. Different accent, different background, different culture. When your quiet nature is misunderstood, it can reinforce the feeling that you do not belong. You may start shrinking yourself. You avoid speaking. To avoid being judged, you avoid attention. To avoid misunderstanding. And slowly your world becomes smaller. But here is something important to remember. Silence is neutral. It is not negative. It is not positive. It becomes good or bad only through interpretation. And interpretation says more about the observer than the person being observed. When people assume things about your silence, they are revealing their own discomfort, their own expectations, their own limitations, not your value. Understanding this does not make the situation disappear, but it changes how you carry the weight of it. Instead of absorbing every judgment, you begin to question it. Instead of internalizing every assumption, you create distance from it. And that distance protects your sense of self. Silence does not define your intelligence. It does not define your kindness. It does not define your worth. But misunderstanding can define your experience if you are not aware of it. Awareness is not about becoming louder. It is about refusing to let false stories replace the truth of who you are. Part 5. The pressure to perform extroversion. In the United States, there is an unspoken expectation. To succeed, you must appear outgoing. You must smile easily, speak confidently, join conversations without hesitation. This expectation exists everywhere. In job interviews, in offices, in networking events, even in casual social situations. For quiet people, this creates pressure. Not the pressure to improve skills, but the pressure to perform a personality. That is not natural. You may feel the need to act more extroverted than you truly are, to talk more than you want, to react faster than you feel comfortable, to fill silence just to avoid judgment. This is not growth. This is performance. And performance is exhausting. For non-native English speakers, this pressure is doubled. You are not only performing confidence, you are performing it in a language that is not your own. Every sentence costs energy. Every conversation requires focus. Every interaction feels like a test. So when you force yourself to act extroverted, you pay a high price. Mentally, emotionally, physically. After social interactions, you may feel drained, not because you are weak, but because you are pretending. Over time, this pretending can lead to something dangerous. You may lose touch with who you actually are. You begin to measure your worth based on how well you perform. How confident did I sound? Did I talk enough? Did they notice my accent? These questions slowly replace more important ones. Was I honest? Was I thoughtful? Was I myself? American culture often celebrates extroversion as the ideal, but that does not mean introversion is inferior. Quiet people often bring depth. They bring listening. They bring reflection. But when the environment rewards noise, quiet strengths become invisible, and invisibility can hurt. Some people respond by becoming louder. Others respond by withdrawing completely. Both responses come from the same place, the fear of being misunderstood. But the solution is not to erase your nature. The solution is to understand the pressure, so it does not control you. You are allowed to be quiet and capable. You are allowed to be reserved and confident. You are allowed to communicate in your own rhythm. Performing extroversion may help you survive in some situations, but living that way permanently will cost you something important: your peace. Recognizing this pressure is the first step toward releasing it. Part 6. The long-term cost of being misunderstood. When silence is misunderstood once, it can be uncomfortable. But when it is misunderstood repeatedly, it becomes damaging. Over time, small misunderstandings turn into patterns. Patterns turn into expectations. And expectations shape your future. In the workplace, this often shows up quietly. You may not be chosen for leadership roles, not because you lack skill, but because you are not visible enough. You may be passed over for promotions, not because your work is weak, but because others speak more confidently about theirs. You may be seen as reliable but not influential, helpful but not strategic. These labels are subtle, but they are powerful. They can limit your growth without you ever being told directly. In relationships, the cost is emotional. People may assume you are distant or uninterested. They may stop sharing deeply with you. They may misread your calmness as lack of care. This can create emotional distance, even when you care deeply. You may feel misunderstood by people who matter to you. And when misunderstanding becomes common, you may stop trying to explain yourself. You choose silence because explaining feels exhausting. But perhaps the deepest cost is internal. When the world consistently misreads you, you may start misreading yourself. You begin to question your personality, your communication style, your value. You may wonder if being quiet is a flaw. This is where self-doubt grows. Not because you are inadequate, but because you are unseen. Being unseen for too long can change how you see yourself. You may lower your expectations. You may stop sharing ideas. You may stop believing your voice matters. And this is the real tragedy. Not that others misunderstand you, but that you begin to accept that misunderstanding as truth. However, there is something important to remember. Misunderstanding is not destiny. Awareness changes outcomes. Once you recognize the cost of being misunderstood, you gain the power to respond differently, not by becoming someone else, but by making yourself understood. On your own terms, you can learn when to speak, how to frame your thoughts, how to protect your energy without disappearing. Understanding the long-term cost is not meant to scare you. It is meant to wake you up. Because your silence, when understood correctly, is not a limitation. It is a strength. That deserves space. Part 7. redefining silence without losing yourself. After understanding why silence is misunderstood, the most important question becomes this: what do you do with that knowledge? The goal is not to become louder, and it is not to force yourself into a personality that feels false. The goal is to redefine silence in a way that protects who you are, while helping others understand you better. This starts with intention. Silence without intention is often misread, but silence with presence feels different. When you are quiet but engaged, your body language speaks. Eye contact, posture, small signals that say, "I am here, I am listening." These signals help others feel your presence, even before you speak. The next step is choosing your moments. You do not need to speak all the time, but when you do speak, let it be clear. One thoughtful sentence can carry more weight than 10 rushed ones. In American culture, clarity creates respect. You don't need to speak first. You don't need to speak often. But when you speak, speak with intention. For non-native English speakers, this is powerful. You can prepare simple phrases to enter conversations, not long explanations, just signals. Can I add something? I'd like to share a thought. One point I want to mention is, these phrases create space for your voice. Without forcing you to rush, they tell others you are ready to contribute. Another important shift is internal. You stop apologizing for being quiet. No more feeling guilty for needing time to think. No more comparing yourself to the loudest person in the room. Your value does not come from volume. It comes from clarity, depth, and awareness. When you accept your quiet nature, others feel it. Confidence is not always heard. Sometimes it is felt, and people respond to that feeling. Redefining silence does not mean changing who you are. It means communicating your presence without betraying your nature. In a world that rewards noise, choosing thoughtful silence is a quiet form of strength. And when you carry that strength with awareness, your silence stops being misunderstood. It becomes respected. If you've made it to this point, I want to thank you. Not for listening loudly, but for listening deeply. If you are a quiet person, especially in a country where noise is often rewarded, I want you to remember this. You are not broken. You do not need to speak faster to be intelligent. You do not need to speak louder to be confident. And you do not need to change who you are to deserve respect. Being quiet does not mean you have nothing to say. It often means you have learned the value of listening. It means you think before you speak. It means you observe what others miss. It means your words carry weight because you don't waste them. Yes, silence can be misunderstood, but understanding yourself is more important than being understood by everyone. Over time, the right people will hear you. They will feel your presence. They will respect your clarity. They will recognize your strength. And until then, be patient with yourself. If this video helped you feel seen, if it put words to something you've felt but never explained, I invite you to stay with this channel. Here we talk slowly, we think deeply, and we grow without losing who we are. If you'd like more videos like this, please consider subscribing. Not because you need more noise, but because sometimes a quiet voice can make the biggest difference. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.